we are going to take a look at chapter 2 in Creswell, which is really about the review of the literature. Now, let me qualify that with chapter 2 discusses the review of the literature in very broad strokes. Chapters 3 and 4 continue the discussion of the literature review from a closer perspective. So all this is providing is kind of a generalized overview, and then we're actually digging into the literature review with theoretical frameworks, theories, etc. in the later chapters. So the whole purpose of a literature review is that it synthesizes. So remember we talked about in class, it's not that person A says this, person B says this article says this. It's really synthesizing what currently exists. So what you're actually doing is you're kind of reading a journal article for the first time and making sure that it's sound. Does it have a good empirical review? Do you have appropriate statistics done? Is it appropriately looking at the topic from a non-biased perspective? Is it relevant to what you're trying to study? Once you've kind of answered that, it goes in the yes pile or the no pile. Once you kind of have a yes pile, you're going to look at what are the patterns and the trends at all of the articles that you're keeping. And basically, each pattern or trend becomes a header in your literature review. And you are going to synthesize what all of those articles say in a logical flow in a paper. You're not going to have citations that are one article. Those are incredibly rare. You should have citations that span multiple articles because you're synthesizing patterns that happen there. And when you're synthesizing, you're really looking for what is the current knowledge? How do we understand it? What are different aspects that other people have studied about this? What are other theories that people have looked at? What are limitations? And by looking at all of those things, you're going to find gaps. Now, a gap doesn't mean that there is no literature that exists, because guess what? Literature exists. It's there. But if you look at those journal articles at the very end, there's kind of always a portion where we talk about what are the limitations of our study and what needs to be done in the future. And a lot of times, by looking at that section specifically, you can find some of the gaps that other people have articulated. And as you continue to find those gaps, then that also highlights your gap. And then it really establishes the research context. So it situates the study, and remember we talk about these research problems that are very broad, purpose statements that are very broad, and yet the dissertation is supposed to be very focused. So what the literature review allows us to do is it lets us explore all kinds of overlapping topics. And even though our methodology is hyper-focused at this one instance, our literature review is an exploration. So yes, while quantitative research is very much hyper-focused and it's about a pattern, it's about a hypothesis, your literature review is a complete exploration. And I think that's where sometimes people kind of miss the train on what quantitative research is. It's not saying that you can only find journal articles about your hypothesis. No, you're going to explore. So just like qualitative explores, you're going to explore in the lit review, whether you're quantitative or qualitative. But when you start your methodology, you have a hypothesis in mind that is specific. Whereas in qualitative, when you start your methodology, you have a broader exploration that's happening where you're going to find additional themes that you would backfill into your literature review. Your literature review should also justify your research approach. So what do I mean by that? It should demonstrate that this is relevant to what's going on in the situation you're studying. You should have articles that support your significance statement. You should have articles that justify the need for the study because you're citing where these people said that there's a limitation here. And so when I really look at the lit review, these are the components that comprise the lit review. And this is what you're actually doing in it. You're not just doing an annotated bibliography, journal article review after journal article review. That's not what you're doing. You're doing this. This is the purpose of it. And so what is the process? And so the process is iterative. So you're going to say, okay, you're going to start off with the general thing that you're searching for because you've got your topic and you know what the keywords are that are associated with your topic. You're going to do some searches on those. You're going to look at who else are they citing? Where are the primary sources that they cite? You're going to say, oh, this person wrote about this other topic. That relates to me, so now I'm going to look for this other topic. So as you're reading journal articles, you need to have like a notebook where you start writing down all of the things that come to mind to do your next search. Because you're going to have all of those ideas when you're actively reading an article and you see something and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, they explore gender. So maybe I should explore gender because I have a similar topic. And so I need to have that explored. And so again, you need to keep your life very organized in the dissertation space. So like I said, printing out your articles, highlighting, using Post-its. Keep a little notebook with you. I have a little bitty small one that goes in my purse, and I write down things as I think of them. So get a little bitty book, and as you're reading, you write down any new key terms that you think of or things to search in there. You're going to constantly assess the credibility and the relevance of things, your yes pile, your no pile. If it's in your yes pile, you think it's good. If it's in your no pile, you're like, it doesn't really meet what I need for my dissertation. Once you've kind of start accumulating all these ideas and you know, okay, all of these journal articles address gender. All of these journal articles address, let's say, social justice. All of these address this. So you're going to take those articles and you're going to organize and synthesize them. And I'm going to give you guys some activities that we're going to do in class to help with that process. So I'm going to be showing you how to use some AI to help you synthesize findings, but you have to do the legwork yourself. AI cannot think for you. It can just help you articulate and find things quicker. And then you're going to begin writing that literature review based on the structures that we identify in a later week. So we're not ready to write a lit review right now. We're really just looking at what are they. What most people don't realize is that there are multiple types of literature reviews. There are narrative reviews, which are told kind of in a narrative way, like you're walking the learner directly through theme after theme after theme or topic after topic, and you're interpreting the body of literature by topic. That's a narrative review. A systematic review provides a detailed and comprehensive summary of all studies on a particular research question. So everyone says, what's the difference? The narrative review is taking those topics and trends and patterns that I was talking about, like gender, like social justice, like racial and cultural implications. All of those are kind of topics. And so we organize it by topic, whereas in a systematic review, we organize it by research question. So if you have a research question that was something like, how does teacher retention impact student outcomes? You would put that as your header, and all of the articles that relate to either of those topics are going to go under that header. There's not a right or a wrong way to do this. However, what you will find a lot of times is as you're trying to answer one research question, you sometimes wind up with a lot of things, a lot of different trends, a lot of other topics. So sometimes what starts as a systematic review becomes a narrative review. Again, I love finding the quickest way from point A to point B. And I think sometimes you just have to have things on the paper. So as you're writing your lit review, my advice is to start from a systematic review perspective. So start looking for articles that answer your research questions. And then from there, you need to go from the systematic review as you're finding those trends, and you can always revise it into a narrative review. Now, the theoretical review is going to be present always. Like, you're not going to get away from that. That's a requirement from Bowie's dissertation template. And sometimes there are studies where there are multiple theories involved and maybe not as much practical application involved. And so in non-dissertation studies, you might see the more theoretical review. For us, it's going to be a required part of the checklist. There are some common pitfalls. So these are common mistakes, things to avoid. You want to avoid a lack of focus. So you don't want to ramble. Yes, a lit review has to be long, but it also has to be concise. And so I far too often see lit reviews where students are just rambling to get to a word count. If you are struggling with a lit review, you need to find more topics. That is how you fill it out. You do not fill it out with fluff words because it's going to come right back to you from your committee. You need to be focused, and you might need to broaden the topics that you're looking at because there might be things that you haven't thought about that might influence your study. Again, we're going to talk about how to use AI to help us find some of those components in this class. A lot of lit reviews have far too many secondary sources. You do not want to cite the citation of an article, of a different article. You want to get the primary source. Never cite an article within another one. Just go find the original article. It's really laziness. So I do not accept secondary sources. You need to track down the primary resource. So look at their reference list and just go pull the original article. It takes 2 minutes. Read it, synthesize it. And then the failure to identify the gap is the other part. You need to take the reader of the lit review on a journey with you. And so you're going to say, here are all the things that people have explored. Here are all of these topics. And then the reader's kind of going to naturally feel the gap. I should feel the gap as the reader. I should be reading this going, well, that's interesting, but like your research problem is this and your research questions are that. And I'm not really seeing that here. And that should be the case. And so as you're taking me on that journey, at some point you have to say, hey, here are the gaps. You're feeling them as you're reading this, but let me just articulate it for you. And then here's all the articles that have also identified this as a gap, or here's multiple articles that don't even discuss this aspect of it. So we really want to strongly avoid those pitfalls. The other piece is the lit review has to connect to the research problem. It can only be an exploration of the research problem. You can't have stuff that all of a sudden happen and don't make sense. So your lit review has to be aligned with your research questions. However, there might be topics that you're exploring in the lit review that might be sidebar conversations to your research questions, but you should address all of your non-methodology research questions. So when you say, how does teacher retention impact student outcomes, you should have a slew of articles that address that from both sides of the fence. And you can't just pretend that only your perspective exists. You have to look at both sides. You have to identify the gaps and inconsistencies. So you're going to take me on that journey, and then you just need to say it. Hey, you've probably already realized this. And obviously, we're not talking about personal language, right, academically, but point it out. Point out the Where's Waldo in the map. Then you have to develop your theoretical framework, and that is going to be its own lengthy discussion, and you better use primary sources. If you use secondary sources on this, I'm going to kick it back to you when you send it to me. A theoretical framework can exceed 5 years of peer review. If you are going to quote John Dewey, you better find John Dewey's book. That's what I expect. So you need primary sources. These live outside of the research requirements. And that is the purpose of the lit review, and we'll continue talking about it in the next video.